Hey, Eric Nance here. Welcome to Dark Side of Therapy podcast. Glad to have you. So, today is going to be a bit intimate because I'm going to share a story, and it's a story very dear to my heart because it's the story of losing my mom. And I know a lot of you have lost parents, lost family members, and it's tough. It's very tough to lose somebody. And losing my mom was especially hard because she's the only parent I ever knew. My dad left the family, did I say the family, when I was about five, and I never knew him, never met him, just kind of became a ghost to me. So my mom and I were very close. She was the person that actually thought two things about me. Number one, that I could get through high school, and number two, that I could get through college. And so she really pushed me. And it wasn't until after her death that I really realized how important that pushing was. And it was gentle. You know, she was never forceful. She just never stopped believing in me. And when I look back, I'm just so incredibly grateful. So when she died, it was the hardest thing in my life. I've never experienced anything like that. I read a lot of online articles about parental death, some good, some not so good. But one thing I read that really stuck out to me is you're going to be an orphan. You're literally going to be an orphan if you've lost both your parents. Well, in this case, I never had one parent, I only had the other parent. And I did feel like an orphan. And it sort of redefines you because who am I? You know, I'm not a son now to anybody. I am an independent, as it were. And that was very difficult for me. And then I went through the experiences a lot of people go through, which is picking up the phone and remembering she's not there. I can't call her. And that was the most painful thing, is that repetition of picking up the phone or putting on a movie and wanting to call her. And that was just gone. So it's been 5 years. And some days are easy, some days are hard, some days are in the middle, but it's never consistent. And I think that's how grief works. I've read a lot of works by David Kessler, who's probably the best grief expert in the world right now. Did a lot of work with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And he has made grief something to be accepted by me. I don't think growing up anybody ever taught me how to grieve or that it was even acceptable. I came from a family, much like the families I work with, we don't talk about stuff. I watched my grandmother essentially die while being hooked to an oxygen machine, and we didn't talk much about that, but clearly something's wrong. And at the end, I certainly knew it wasn't long. So my mom was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease in uh, July of 2016. And what had happened is she started getting these weird lesions in her mouth. And initially we thought, my God, maybe it's mouth cancer. You know, she'd been a smoker for many years. She hadn't smoked in about 20 years though. But that was our big fear. And she went in and got the diagnosis of bullous pemphigoid. Bullous pemphigoid. I'd never heard of it. She'd never heard of it. And the doctors she worked with, the dermatologist, said it's pretty damn rare. But essentially, what happens is it's an autoimmune disease that causes these horrid lesions all over your body, including the inside of your mouth. So imagine walking around with these horrible lesions that burst and leak fluid. That's your life. The thing about it is, as I understood it, is it can go into remission after 5 or 6 years, but you're never going to live without it. And it can also flare up later. So not a great way to live. And she slowly declined after the diagnosis, couldn't eat anything. I mean, anything that was even remotely citrusy or had any flavor to it, it would get inside of her mouth and just burn it horribly. So essentially, she could not enjoy food anymore. Eventually went to a nursing home, and then her final days went to a hospital, and that was it. The hardest part of the experience, well, two things, and I was doing my own therapy at that point. And I went to my therapist and I told him how angry I was at my mom because she wasn't fighting more. She would get out of the doctor's office and take a very passive approach to there's nothing more they can do, and they can't make me comfortable outside of what they're doing. And I said, Mom, you got to fight for this stuff. Let me go in there. And my therapist said something to me I'll never forget. He said, this is all your agenda. which really shut me up because he was right. What I wanted for her was not what she wanted. And I think probably a month and a half into the diagnosis, she started to give up to the point one night, and this was Wednesday, she died Sunday. I went in there to visit her, and she'd actually just come out of surgery. And I forgot the reason they even did the surgery. It was some kind of last minute exploratory thing. And I'll never forget how different her face looked. It was so sunken in and gaunt is probably the best word for that. And I'd always heard stories about people when they're about to die, that's how they start to look. And I said to her, please don't give up. Please don't give up. And I hadn't cried like that in a very long time. I hadn't cried in front of my mother in so long. And I went home that night, and I just somehow knew that was it. We were down to the last couple of days. And it's not that she told me that she's ready to go. I just knew. And I came back the next day, and the social worker there said, we don't think it's going to be very long. And at that point, she didn't recognize me anymore. And that was the second hardest part, is not having your mom recognize you anymore. She thought I was her mother, and I sat there, and that's like being hollowed out is the only way I can describe that feeling, being hollowed out. And she ended up dying that Sunday. I spent some time with her right before she died. I did not see her as she died. I was not in the room at that point. And looking back 5 years, the thing that stands out to me the most is people always say, how do you get through something like this? I've got a lot of friends in their 40s and haven't lost their parents, and they ask, well, how do you get through this? It's like they have no idea. They have no idea. And I always say to them, you get through it. There is no magic formula for this, because grief doesn't have an antidote. You cannot fight. I don't care how much you drink. I don't care how many prescription drugs or non-prescription drugs you put into your system. Nothing is going to quell the grief. It's not going to obey. So you get through it by living every day and feeling the grief and recognizing how much you love that person, because not a day goes by that I don't think about how much I loved her and how much I miss her and how different my life is now. Am I still angry at her? In some ways, but I'm angry at her because I miss her, and that's part of my growth and healing too. It's also helped me because when a client now comes in and tells me about loss, whether it's a child or a brother or a sister or a parent, I don't know what they're going through. I would never tell a client I know what you're going through, because I don't. Every experience is so unique, but I can relate now. I can relate now to that kind of pain. I get it. I understand it, because it will bring you to your knees. It did to me. That's the kind of pain we're talking about. The kind of pain you wonder, will I get through it? And to be able to sit with somebody that's either going through that or is going to go through it, it's just a wonderful thing. No one trained me how to do that, but the fact that I can relate to somebody who's going through the same kind of pain, man, that is the best thing in the world. Best thing in the world. So as far as Dark Side of Therapy podcast goes, we're going to talk about death from time to time, because I think it's an important issue. I think it's an issue we don't want to talk about because it's scary. And here's why it's scary: because it's pretty finite. There is no workaround. Everyone is going to die. What happens after we die, whatever your belief is, that's great. But as far as this life, none of us gets off the rock alive. And we don't like things that are final. And that's why I want to talk about it. I want to talk about the scary part of death, which is the finality. So we're going to come back to this time and time again. So thank you very much. And if you are going through an experience of grief right now, or know somebody who is, just let it be okay. And know that you can't fix it. There is no fixing this. But there is being present for their grief and your own grief.